Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to explore one of the most interactive, yet honestly totally underappreciated elements of web design, the cursor. We are talking about how a tiny graphic, typically just 32 by 32 pixels, serves as this incredibly powerful, dynamic character in your user interface. I mean, think about it. It's the literal bridge between the user's physical hand and the digital world you've built. So we're going to look at how manipulating just the CSS cursor property can completely transform the user experience, instantly communicating intent, status, and precision.
To really grasp the power of this, I want you to imagine looking over a developer's shoulder at a split-screen setup. On the left side, you've got your code editor, something like VS Code, and on the right side, you have a live web browser, say Google Chrome, open right to the page you're building. We are going to look at exactly what happens to the user's mouse pointer when we tweak just a single line of CSS over in that editor.
And this setup brilliantly illustrates the hot reload loop. You know, when you edit the CSS on the left, hit save, and bam, the browser DOM on the right updates instantly. What we're going to do is watch the cursor react to this real-time update. It's a really visceral, immediate transformation that morphs the pointer based on the exact rules we dictate in our style sheet.
We'll start our coding journey with the super common state, the wait cursor. This is the CSS property you reach for when your application is doing something heavy in the background. It tells the user, quite literally, to hold on. Now, depending on your operating system, the browser typically renders this as an hourglass, maybe a watch, or that classic spinning loader icon. It's just a universally understood signal that the interface is temporarily blocked from interaction.
Now, check out this real-time morph in our split-screen scenario. Over on the left, we type body cursor : wait and hit save. Instantly, on the right side, the standard arrow pointer literally morphs into a spinning loader. This is exactly how you handle long-running background operations or page loads. Without having to write any complex JavaScript loading modals, you've instantly communicated to the user that they just need to wait a second.
Let's see how this builds into precision tools. We're going to jump back in and change the code again, this time introducing the crosshair cursor. This renders as a super simple cross, just intersecting horizontal and vertical lines. And it's the absolute perfect UI cue for when the user is stepping into an application that requires coordinate selection, drawing, or, really precise targeting.
So the crucial point here is the visual feedback. If you look at the code on the left, we add cursor : crosshair to our image editor class. The second that's saved, the cursor hovering over our image editor section on the right instantly transforms from that wait spinner we just had into a precise sniper reticle. If you're building a cropping tool or a paint application, simply applying this CSS property instantly puts the user into a mindset of exact precision.
Next up, we really need to handle boundaries, right? Like, what happens when a user tries to click a disabled submit button or drag a file into a restricted upload area? We can edit our code to bring up the universal not allowed symbol. Basically, this is your interface's way of firmly but politely saying no way.
Just like that, back in our live environment, applying cursor not allowed to a disabled button class morphs the pointer into a stark forbidden symbol. You know the one, usually a red or dark gray circle with a diagonal slash. The beauty of this is its immediacy, and honestly, the absolute relief of not having to write some convoluted JavaScript function just to block an action. The user doesn't even have to click the button and wait for an annoying error message. The cursor itself communicates that the action is locked before they even try.
Taking a quick step back, these core UI states, which are sourced directly from the MDN web docs, by the way, give us a perfect categorization of these visual cues. We've got the wait spinner for blocking actions, the crosshair reticle for targeting, and the not allowed symbol for disabled elements. These are the fundamental building blocks of native, accessible user feedback, and they're incredibly reliable because they just lean right on the operating system's default rendering.
Now, those standard OS cursors are great for sure. But what happens when you're building a highly specific brand experience? What if you want, say, an eye graphic that physically opens up when you hover over a card? Or maybe a floaty, glowing orb? Sometimes basic CSS keywords just aren't enough to achieve that next-level custom design.
According to the research over at CSS Tricks, we can actually completely overhaul the experience by taking matters into our own hands using JavaScript. The trick here is twofold. First, you hide the default browser cursor completely by setting cursor none in your CSS. Then you use JavaScript to track movement events, dynamically binding a custom HTML element, like a stylized div or maybe an SVG, to the exact X and Y coordinates of the user's mouse.
However, with great power comes great responsibility. We absolutely must implement fallbacks. If you create a custom JavaScript cursor, you have to add pointer events none to it.
Actually, if you don't, it will physically block the user from clicking the links underneath it, which is a nightmare. Furthermore, we have to be smart about accessibility. We should disable this custom JS script for users on touch devices, because they don't use a mouse, and for users who have their system set to prefers reduced motion, since delayed floaty cursors can be super disorienting. Finally, always provide a standard CSS image fallback, like a base 64 encoded SVG, just in case the JavaScript totally fails to load. Speaking of those fallback images, there's a magic number you really need to keep in mind: 32. If you're using the CSS URL property to load an image as a cursor, you can't just load some massive, high-resolution file. User agents actively restrict cursor sizes to avoid potential misuse and spoofing. In fact, Mozilla strongly recommends limiting your custom cursor image to exactly 32 by 32 pixels. If you try to use an image larger than the browser's maximum supported size, the browser is just going to ignore it entirely and revert back to the default arrow.
Which brings us to a really vital philosophy when messing with standard interface rules. As Declan Chidlow wrote in CSS Tricks, use your power as a developer with taste and restraint. Because the web is accessible by default, overriding native OS features requires a really delicate balance. Progressive enhancement is key here. You can totally create beautiful, highly customized experiences, but you have to ensure you aren't undermining the basic usability and accessibility that users literally rely on every day.
Whether you're simply swapping to a CSS weight spinner in VS Code to communicate a background process, or programming a dynamic JavaScript orb to follow the user around the screen, the cursor remains your most direct, physical connection to the person on the other side of the screen. It is a tiny 32-pixel canvas that speaks volumes. So how will you use it to guide them? What tiny detail of your interface will you transform next?